Hospital workers, what shocking regrets/confessions have you heard from dying patients? Story 1. I used to work in the ICU, and I will never forget one patient in his 40s. He was fighting AIDS-related complications, and toward the end, his health deteriorated very quickly. He had come from a religious family, but had been estranged because of his sexuality. In his final days, he shared with me that he felt he was being punished for who he was. It broke my heart. Despite our best efforts to care for him, time ran out far too quickly. I sat at his bedside as he expressed his fear and guilt, and though we couldn't change the outcome, I did everything I could to provide comfort. He passed before we even had a chance to help him, and it still haunts me. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I was diagnosed with T-cell lymphoma on my birthday in 2016. I was told that if my chemotherapy didn't work, I had only weeks to live in 2017. Up until that point, I didn't believe I was going to beat it, even though by then I had gone through more than 14 rounds of different and brutal types of chemotherapy. It feels foolish now, looking back, but until the doctor spoke those words, I hadn't even written my will. None of us were prepared for it, and honestly, I was in shock. I was 34, turning 35. This wasn't how my story was meant to end. Why me? The doctor promised he would do everything he could to transition me to palliative care and get the process started. I was in shock. One moment I was preparing for another routine doctor's meeting. We ran some tests. Here's what we found. Here's what we're going to do, the kind of meeting I had almost every day. The next, I was just silent. Anger hit me first. I was bitter. Why me? What did I ever do to deserve such a cruel hand? Screw the world and its happy existence. But that anger faded quickly. It was really just a single minute of pure raw, why me? Then I looked at everyone's faces. That was when the anger left me. I simply sat and watched the people around me process the news. In the room were my favorite nurse, my mom, my wife, and of course, the doctor. I had never seen my mom look so helpless. I could almost see the hope drain from her as she leaned against the wall, searching for support. She had just been told her baby was going to die, and this time she couldn't fix it. I could see the storm inside her as she tried not to cry. The nurse who was there had only come to administer more chemotherapy. By that point in my treatment, I had seen her almost every day, and we had bonded. She didn't take the news well. Later, I was told that when I received the diagnosis, she reacted to the chemo she was giving me. In truth, she had broken down and had to leave work early. My darling wife, whom I had already put through so much, was clearly trying to hold it together. She was in the anger/bargaining stage. For the first time, I saw her refusing to take no for an answer, and I didn't have the energy or the motivation to calm her down. She was asking for second opinions, researching other hospitals, calling and emailing them, scanning reports and test results to send out. She simply refused to accept it and threw herself into action. I just sat there, my head filled with what felt like billions of thoughts, watching everything unfold around me. When you're told you're going to die, eventually you reach acceptance. Once I did, there was nothing left to fight. All the little things in life that used to annoy, stress, or anger me suddenly disappeared. Everything became beautiful, and I noticed it all. My perspective had shifted completely. My time was running out, and all I wanted was to be surrounded by love. My only regret, as so many people here have said, is time. I didn't do enough with it. I didn't have more time to watch my beautiful baby niece grow up. I wondered if she would take after her mother, my lovely sister, who never truly got to enjoy her pregnancy because her brother was diagnosed with cancer just months before she was due to give birth. Why did I waste so much time being angry at my father? We lost years ignoring each other over petty family issues. Why didn't I travel more? Why didn't I take more photos of us during those trips? I had countless pictures of museums, buildings, and food, but hardly any of me with my wife or my family, actually enjoying those moments together. Now, drugged heavily, I scramble through my memories, trying to hold on to my wife's face as she looked out at our view in Croatia. When you're dying, you realize you can always Google the art and the architecture. The real treasure is the photos of you and the people you love. Cancer robbed us of joy, and all I wanted was to see that twinkle of happiness in my loved one's eyes. Love and time. That's it. In the end, when everything else is stripped away, all that remains is love and time. Story 3. I am not a hospital worker, but I do have a story to share, and I hope it will be a fitting addition to this thread. I spent 5 years living in Laos, a small country in Southeast Asia. During that time, I lived with a Lao family, and I had a Lao grandmother. She didn't speak English, though she was fluent in French and possibly a few other languages. Some afternoons, I would sit with her while she chewed betel nut and chatted with her friends. I would guess she was in her 70s then. I didn't speak much Lao back then, but I would listen anyway, and sometimes she would tell me stories. I felt that I had a really special connection with this lovely woman. Occasionally, I would tell her stories in English, and she would just smile and laugh along. It always felt like she truly listened, even if she didn't understand the words. Then she became ill. I am not exactly sure what it was, though I believe it may have been cancer. I never heard the name of it in English, so I can't say for certain. I knew she was in a lot of pain whenever she was awake, so every afternoon she would lie on a bed beneath a large tree in the yard. When she could no longer walk there herself, she asked me to carry her. So I would come home from work, carry her out to the bed each afternoon, and then return before nightfall to carry her back inside. No one else was allowed to do it. It had to be me. This went on for several months as she grew weaker and weaker, eventually needing oxygen just to breathe properly. Some evenings, I would sit beside her bed in the main house and hold her hand. Two people with decades between us, no shared language, yet such a deep connection. It breaks my heart to think of it now. One day, she told me she wished so much that she could speak English to me, and the effort of saying it made her cough. She asked me what that word was in English, and I told her it was cough. She made me repeat it until she could say it herself. To me, she admitted that she wished she had been able to learn my language so she could truly talk with me. That, I think, was the one regret she ever voiced. I don't know of any others, but she mentioned this to me more than once. In the weeks that followed, she grew weaker and weaker. Almost every night, I sat by her bedside because during the day, when she was awake, she had been asking for me. I often think about all the stories she told me, even though at the time I couldn't fully understand everything she said. One evening, when I came into her room, my Lao mum was sitting with her. Grandmother looked up at me and smiled. She knew she didn't have much time left. Then she said something I will never forget. Something that is considered a great honor. She asked me to become a monk for her funeral because it would make her happy. Even though Mum translated it, I somehow understood it perfectly. I don't know how, but I did. A couple of days later, I sat with her for most of the day. Each time I tried to get up, she would gently squeeze my hand, asking me to stay. After many hours, Mum came and told me to get some sleep. It wouldn't be long now, and she promised to wake me if I was needed. Apparently, she never opened her eyes again and passed away shortly after I went to sleep. I was woken immediately afterward. I know this isn't exactly what the OP requested, but I think it's a very touching story, and it fits with the spirit of this thread. And yes, I did become an ordained Buddhist monk for my grandmother's funeral. It was one of the greatest honors of my life to do that for such a gentle and wise woman. If this doesn't fully meet the requirements for the thread, feel free to remove it. At least now I've managed to get it off my chest. Story 4. Maybe it wasn't the last thing they said, but it was the last thing he and she said to me. I was working in a hospital doing X-rays and CT scans. A man came in with abdominal pain, and they ordered a chest and abdomen X-ray. He and his wife were relatively young, probably in their mid-40s. We chatted as I performed his exam. He mentioned that he started feeling unwell while working out, and I joked that being out of shape had kept me out of the ER since I'd never had any gym accidents. We all laughed. When I finished, he said, "Hey man, I am glad I met you. Your attitude is infectious." I thanked him, feeling a little embarrassed. I'd never received a compliment like that from another guy before. Fast forward an hour later, and they ordered a CT to rule out an aneurysm. His wife and the nurse accompanied him to the scanner because he wasn't doing well. His breathing was shallow, he had lost almost all his color, and he looked terrible. I performed the CT, and it was immediately clear that he had a massive tear in his aorta, from the top arch all the way down to his iliac. I am no doctor, but I knew it was extremely serious. I made sure to follow protocol, notifying the performing physician and the radiologist. Time was not on his side. I went into the CT suite, and he asked me what I thought. I gave him a reassuring answer, even though I knew the images were still processing. He could tell I was lying. As I was getting ready to slide him back onto the table, he grabbed my hand and said, "I am scared of dying." I told him, "You're not going to die." He nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. When we arrived in the ICU, I began connecting him to the monitor. The doctor came in and explained what was happening and what to expect next. He was going to be airlifted to a larger hospital for surgery. After that, I headed back to my department. About 15 minutes later, a page came over the loudspeaker, "Code Blue ICU." I knew immediately who it was. I rushed over to see if I could help in any way. When I arrived, the room was chaotic. Staff performing CPR, the doctor shouting orders, nurses running around trying to assist. He was intubated now, the life gone from his eyes, and a small pool of blood had gathered at the corner of his mouth. I glanced toward the corner and saw his wife witnessing everything. I asked if she wanted to step outside, and I led her to an empty room next door. I asked if she needed anything. She shook her head and said, "I am just scared he's going to die." I didn't know what to say because I knew, in all likelihood, this was the end. I am not a religious person, but in that moment I blurted out, "Can I pray for you?" She nodded. I grasped her hands and began to pray. Praying and praying. What felt like a lifetime was actually around 15 minutes. The house supervisor stepped in and asked to speak with the wife. When she walked away, I decided to return to my department. About half an hour later, as my shift ended, I swung by to see what had happened. When I reached the room, I didn't go in. The wife was sitting at the bedside with her back to me, quietly humming a song, holding his hand and gently caressing his hair with the other. The husband's breathing tube was gone, all the machines were turned off, and I knew he was gone. I didn't say a word. I turned around, punched out, and went home. Story 5. I am not a hospital worker, but I had a grandmother who essentially raised me, my younger sister, and my older brother. My dad passed away from a heart attack when I was 3, and my mom had to work 3 jobs to support us. So we moved in with my grandma, and she took care of us like it was her full-time job. Eventually, we moved from New York to Florida, and she came with us and still lives with us. She cooked dinner every night, had a daily routine of watching soap operas, and smoked her Pall Mall cigarettes at night until a bleeding ulcer scared her straight. She was in her 70s when we began noticing signs of diminishing memory. The saddest thing about watching someone develop dementia is when they are still lucid enough to realize they're losing their mind. She would say things like, "I am going senile, I can't remember this." She could recall the recipes she had made for us daily or weekly, or ones she had been making her whole life, but she couldn't remember the ingredients. She would let things burn on the stove. We had to try to stop her from cooking, all while she was fully aware that her mind was slipping away. It was heartbreaking to watch. Sometimes she would cry she had no control over it. I think with dementia patients, it's often harder on the family than on the person with the dementia, at least until they become completely unaware of what's happening. When she became fully helpless, we brought in a hospice nurse to watch over her, and we were basically just waiting for her to pass, which was devastating. I stopped going to work and stayed at my mom's house all the time. We were essentially on constant watch, knowing the nurse could come at any moment to tell us that it was time. I hadn't showered in days. I didn't want to miss it. My aunt was flying in from New York City, but her plane was delayed. It was getting very close to the end, and we were all standing around her bed. I said, "All right, I am going to take a quick shower. I will be right back." As soon as I stepped out, the nurse came out and said, "It's time." My aunt had just arrived, and we all gathered around her bed watching her take her last breath. There's something strange about witnessing someone you love take their final breath. It's almost as if you can feel their energy leave the room. I do remember the last time I talked to her, though, and she could actually recognize me. I was leaving to go back to my apartment one night, and by this point, she had been lying in bed all day and night, staring at the ceiling. I walked into her room, looked down at her, and said, "I love you, Grandma. I will see you later." She looked up at me with her beautiful hazel eyes and recognized me. She said, okay, well, I love you too." That was the last thing I ever said to her, and that's how I will remember her, not as the lifeless, shell-like person in the hospital bed, or as the body rolled down the hallway while all my family watched from the living room. Dementia is definitely harder on the people around them than it is on them before it progresses to your loved one being a shell of their former self. Story 6. I lost my grandmother in June. It was really hard. The family has been divided ever since, largely because the youngest, my Aunt Tracy, took advantage of my parents after they took out a second mortgage to save the property my grandmother had lived on. Tracy had lived there with my grandmother for almost her entire life. She's now in her 50s and had a son whom my grandmother basically raised. She rolled $30,000 of credit card debt into the mortgage, and my parents were left to manage everything, paying all expenses except for utilities, like a landlord, while Tracy only had to pay $500 a month. This was all on a waterfront property in Florida. My parents did everything for Tracy and her son, and after 15 years, not a single payment had been made. They wanted Tracy off the property now that her son was 18 and old enough to be independent. Somehow, the lawyer made a huge mistake in the agreement, stating that as long as my grandmother was alive, she had the final say over who could live on the property. And somewhat understandably, my grandmother wanted Tracy and my cousin to stay. This caused a lot of conflict. Tracy was such a nightmare that she filed a complaint that looked like it was written by an 8-year-old, accusing my mom of abusing my grandmother and forcing her to sign the papers that would ultimately transfer the property to my parents for saving it. If Tracy had paid even part of what she owed, my parents wouldn't have felt the need to kick her out. I found myself speaking to my grandmother less and less, even though I had spent so many years with her and loved her deeply. Then my uncle called and told me she was in the hospital and not doing well. They were debating whether to remove her pacemaker and gave an estimate of 4 weeks to 4 months. I had planned to call her the next day and try to set up a 3-way call with my sister so we could say goodbye, but she passed away at 6 a.m. before I had the chance. My uncle called to tell me and then said something that still makes me cry. My grandmother had reached out to all her kids. There were 8, though. My Uncle David had passed when I was little, leaving only my mom. As she was passing, she was calling my mom's name. I bawled so hard I think I made my uncle uncomfortable. It just breaks me. Tracy had called my mom the night before, but my mom didn't answer, thinking, "What the heck, bang you." She was calling for my Grammy, not my mom. My mom is handling things okay. Tracy is the worst, and my grandmother did hurt my mom very deeply. After years of pain and the toll it took on her mental health and well-being, 2 weeks ago, Tracy and her son were finally forced to find another place to live. The house, which we already knew was only 15 years old, was destroyed beyond repair. To make matters worse, the people responsible smashed every window and light bulb, tore holes in walls, broke and stole appliances, and messed up the plumbing and electricity. When my grandfather was alive, he had built a large shed workshop with high windows overlooking the water. He was Native American and loved nature. My mom is now living in that shed. She's healing from my parents' divorce earlier this year. I also believe that the stress on their relationship was partially caused by Tracy and the chaos surrounding the house. Life is complicated as fudge, and unfortunately, there are some truly awful people out there. Story 7. This is a difficult question to answer. I am an ICU nurse and have been present for many people's end-of-life experiences. The reason it's so difficult is surprisingly simple. When patients come into the ICU, they often require a ventilator, a tube through the trachea, and vocal cords which prevents them from speaking. Depending on their medications, they're often not fully conscious either. This means communication about regrets usually happens before intubation, and either they didn't have time to express their thoughts due to the urgency of the situation. They didn't feel it was the right time. They assumed there would be more life, more opportunities. The challenge is compounded by the fact that many patients haven't shared these thoughts with family or loved ones before arriving at the ICU. A few days later, I come on shift. I don't actually know this person. I haven't heard their voice or their ideas. What I know about my patient comes from their visitors, loved ones, and family. My job is to remind those same people that beneath the tubing, behind the equipment, and beneath the medications, which are the bread and butter of my work, under the blanket and on the bed, is their loved one. The person is the point. But yes, we also tend the machines. Machines for breathing, machines to keep the heart on pace, machines that reduce the effort a tired heart needs to pump, machines that do the work of failing kidneys, machines that compensate for the tiny spaces left in diseased lungs, trying to move more air than they can ever hope to. And we use drugs, drugs that assist the machines, drugs that push the body to do what it currently cannot or no longer can. The patient moves from day to night and back again, and the family asks us to do one more thing, then another, because they want their loved one back. Sometimes we can give that time, we can allow more moments together in life. Sometimes we can't. And if you've ever wondered about the regrets of dying patients, many of them go unspoken. The regret that they weren't able to tell their loved ones they didn't want everything done, maybe some interventions for a while, but not all of them, until the very end. The regret that their families wanted to help, but they as patients couldn't physically say, "No, don't do that. It's not helping." The regret of those who understand there are worse things than dying, yet for whom those worse things are their current reality. So, I guess the point is this. Don't wait until it's too late. Have a conversation with your loved ones about what you want to happen if the worst occurs. Don't dismiss it as having bad thoughts or being unpleasant, and don't worry that it will somehow invite fate. Discuss organ donation as if you truly had the opportunity to do it. Let your loved ones know your wishes so that your real end-of-life regrets are left for things like not going to Disneyland when you could have, or spending too much time commuting to work. Story 8. So, the chemo didn't work and they sent me home. My wife didn't give up. I did, though I didn't tell her. I had endured so much pain up to that point. I was tired, weak, and honestly, I was waiting to greet death like an old friend. But watching my wife fight for me, making calls, researching options, made me want to fight for her. One of the second opinions the doctor who delivered the news sent me to was a hospital near us, in Hammersmith. I will call him Dr. K. Dr. K was meant to be in charge of my stem cell transplant if I ever achieved remission. He reviewed my charts and said that, in his opinion, the last chemo I received had been ineffective for my condition. He recommended that GM would be appropriate for the type of cancer I had. To be honest, I just wanted to go in peace. I knew exactly what another round of chemo would do to me. But for my wife and family to have peace, knowing I had tried everything, I said yes, and it was brutal. After one round of chemo, I went for a scan, grabbed a pack of cigarettes and a bottle of my favorite drink, went home, and began what I called my farewell tour. A couple of days later, I got a panicked, crying call from my wife. "What's wrong? Have you not checked your freaking email? Freaking go now!" I opened my email. It was from Dr. K. That one round of GM had given me full remission. There wasn't a single trace of cancer left. He also told me to prepare for my stem cell transplant since my sister was a 100% match and that we'd be starting in a few weeks. What the heck doesn't even begin to describe how I felt in that moment? I sat there reading that email for an hour, crying, laughing, not knowing what was happening. I had literally been ready to die, and just like that, I wasn't. I threw out the cigarettes and never smoked again. I had been a pack-a-day smoker before cancer. It all felt surreal, like some cruel prank, or maybe I had actually died and was now living in a simulation. This was 2017. A lot of people read cancer stories and imagine the narrative ends here, all tied up with a nice bow, happiness, and sunshine. The reality is survival. After cancer and the stem cell transplant, my immune system was extremely weak. I've had 2 serious hospitalizations for pneumonia, 2 severe bouts of gut and skin, GVHD, shingles, intense cramps, neuropathy, drug reactions. The physical toll was immense, but the mental anguish of surviving was just as heavy. I suffered, and still suffer, from survivor's guilt. All this while being on immunosuppressive drugs during a pandemic where wearing a mask has become political. I am just surviving to the next step, whatever that is. I am going to ride this car into the ground. Story 9. All right. I've been waiting for the right time to tell this story. I think this is it. About 6 months ago, a 59-year-old man came in with a large, discolored mole on the back of his neck. He said it was painful, like a bee sting stuck in his skin at all times. It immediately raised red flags for skin cancer, and sure enough, the labs confirmed it, stage 4 melanoma. Further analysis revealed that the cancer had metastasized to his lymph nodes, lungs, liver, bones, extensive soft tissue, and even his spinal cord. He was given an estimate of just 3 months to live. I spent a fair amount of time with this man during his last weeks. It was remarkable how different he became in just a few months. Before, he had been arrogant, obnoxious, prideful, skeptical, and quite self-absorbed, not exactly a fun patient. But in those final weeks, his ego seemed to dissolve. All that was left was simply him, the real him, or at least that's how it felt to me. He had spent his life working as a writer and reporter for a major political website. A very liberal man, he confided that his biggest regret was how much he had absorbed himself in politics. That really shocked me. I had many long conversations with him about it, trying to understand. He explained that he had spent his entire life absorbed in political feuds, arguing that certain politicians were bad and others were good, that his political beliefs were the absolute truth, and that the highest values belonged to the Democratic Party, while anything else was ignorance or bigotry. He told me about all the hate that had surrounded his daily life. While he had convinced himself that it was righteous work, that he was persuading the masses of real values, he realized there had been no real good coming from it. It was all just drama and hatred. He wasn't truly convincing conservatives. If anything, all he did was insult them, and he wasn't teaching his fellow liberals anything of value either. Most of what he said was biased political rhetoric that other liberals praised him for, mostly villainizing people for holding different beliefs, dividing the world into good and bad based on which candidate someone supported, and fueling hatred. He had lost friendships, lovers, and political opportunities. Politics had been the main lens through which he viewed the world, and in the end, he realized how much it had cost him. He only saw the pointlessness and foolishness of it all with the clarity that came from his prognosis. Death had become his teacher, showing him that his life had been dominated by pride and dogma. He told me that politics matter, but they shouldn't command more attention than children give to their school council. Politics serve a purpose, but they should never become the central focus of anyone's life. Yes, politics involve real issues with serious consequences, but he believed people weren't truly solving anything through them. It was mostly a platform for finger-pointing, with the opposing party cast as the scapegoat for all the world's problems. The real solution, he said, lies in focusing on living a loving and meaningful life for yourself and for those around you. The man desperately wished he had spent his time loving people, trying to understand others, and focusing on gaining experiences, living a richer, more meaningful life, so that when death came he might be ready. Oh, and he also wished he had worn sunscreen. Story 10. I was sitting with a woman who had been diagnosed with lung cancer some time ago, and that night she went into respiratory distress. The moment I saw her, I knew she was hypoxic and confused, even though 15 minutes earlier she had been noted as stable and asleep. I also managed to convince the intern that she wasn't simply delirious. She had pulmonary edema. The intern was inexperienced, and after a struggle to get the order approved, I administered IV furosemide to remove the fluid from her lungs. Within 20 minutes, she was breathing much more easily. The registrar came upstairs. Apparently, the intern's pride had been injured and quickly realized I had been right. That intern didn't return to the ward much after that night. Don't worry. I stayed with her the whole time, calming her as she feared she might die in that moment, and I told her I wouldn't leave until she was stable. We had a long talk about her illness. She hadn't found a way to tell her children that she had cancer, and they weren't aware of how seriously sick she was. The registrar and I sat with her, discussing why she hadn't shared it, and then explained that we would need to bring her children in so they could hear directly from us. Once she was stable and comfortable, we called her daughter first. The doctor had a realistic discussion with both of them about what was happening and how long it might take. Her daughter was overwhelmed. I ended up hugging the two of them as they cried together. She wasn't angry with her mother, but she was barely able to process what was happening. As the sun rose, I remember her looking out the window, taking in the dawn. She told me she wished she had shared everything with her children sooner, so they could have been better prepared, but she was glad she had finally told them. She felt peaceful knowing what was coming and that her family would be with her. I left around 9 a.m. after chasing down all my files and handing them over, then went home for a stiff drink. She passed 3 days later. It remains one of my most poignant memories and something I carry with me. From that experience, I learned to tell my parents and my family that I love them because we never truly know what's around the corner. Since then, I've also been involved in end-of-life care with my stepfather's uncle, who had acute myeloid leukemia in January, and my Nana in February, managing her palliative care and infections according to her decisions. Before these past few months, I was afraid of death and dying, but after sharing these moments with my mom and me with my stepfather's uncle, and dad and me with my Nana, I've come to terms with death and end-of-life care. I am profoundly grateful to have been able to share these moments, however painful, whether at work or home. Story 11. My Nan was in the hospital, 88 years old, and nearing the end. On my way home from work, I got a call from my mom saying they doubted she would make it through the weekend. I got home, changed out of my work clothes, hopped in my car, and drove straight to the hospital. As I walked, or rather ran, from the car park, I passed a pub and saw my dad and uncle having a beer. I said hello and asked why they weren't with Nan, their own mother. They explained that they had actually been there all day, making space for the rest of us who were at work or otherwise engaged. I walked to the entrance and saw several cousins, aunts, my mom, and my sisters. My brother was with me and we went straight up to the room. There were at least 12 people there. I approached the bed and noticed everyone was quiet, trying not to cry. I didn't quite get it. I knew it was a sad moment, but my focus was on how scared my Nan must have been in a room full of people, all waiting silently for her to pass. I started talking to her. I know my brother would have liked to, but he couldn't get a word out. I began telling her about my son's first sports day, how he had entered every event, won a few races, and was absolutely ecstatic about his achievements at 6 years old. Nan was smiling, eyes closed, as I rambled on. People moved in and out of the room, and when I looked up, I realized I had been talking for an hour. Around me were my brother, my dad, my mom, and my sisters, all quietly watching me chatter away. I felt a little embarrassed and gestured for someone else to speak, but everyone was too focused on keeping their own emotions in check. My Nan hadn't spoken to anyone for 3 days. As I was leaving, my cousin, who had driven 4 hours to visit, was coming in just after visiting hours. I leaned over and said, "All right, Nan, I've got to go and keep Dad out of trouble. I will see you in the morning." In a tired voice, she whispered, "Okay, my love, by my name." I almost broke down in the doorway. My brother, a big guy, put his arm around me and guided me outside. We walked straight into 30 to 40 family members and some family friends. Closure. She passed that evening. My cousin, who had driven down, had been sitting with her for an hour when she went. He was able to keep her calm, and she kept asking for my granddad, who had died 3 months earlier. My cousin, who resembles my granddad when he was young, held her hand and comforted her. I hope that when I go, I have a family who cares enough to stay with me like that. Story 12. I remember a 40-year-old patient dying from breast cancer that had spread throughout her body. She had been diagnosed 10 years earlier and had undergone a mastectomy. The doctor had recommended a bilateral mastectomy with reconstruction due to the high risk of recurrence. She had chosen to keep her remaining breast, hoping to feel whole in case she remarried. Later, she expressed deep regret over that decision. Had she undergone the bilateral mastectomy, she would not have developed cancer in her remaining breast and might not have been facing death at such a young age. Ultimately, she never remarried. A week later, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I immediately told my doctor that I wanted a bilateral mastectomy with reconstruction. I also had an aggressive form of cancer. My doctor initially kept pushing for a lumpectomy, which I probably would have agreed to if I hadn't heard how much my patient regretted her choice. I truly feel that by sharing her lifelong regret, she saved my life. Edit, thank you all so much. I honestly thought this story would just get buried. My prayers are with everyone facing breast cancer. You are not alone, and I hope for your full recovery. I was 48 at the time of my diagnosis and have been cancer-free for 10 years now. I think of that lady often. She was a mother of 5 and truly a blessing to me. She was my last patient on my last shift before I received my results and started chemo. If it weren't for her, I know I wouldn't be here today. Edit. I had grade 3 HER2 positive breast cancer. Story 13. I've been a nurse for 14 years, and one thing that still hits me deeply is a 14-year-old boy fighting cancer. He underwent a transplant but passed away from the side effects. I had nursed him for almost a year, and we had grown very close. The day he went back to his home country in the United States, I told him I was his big mama and that when he returned, we would be together making many plans. His dream was to be a doctor, so I promised him I would quit my job and be his nurse the moment he became one. On the night before he and his family left, my husband, a chef, cooked his favorite foods for the family and all the nurses. He even taught my patient how to make the recipes, which my patient loved, as he also enjoyed cooking. We had dinner together, and I cried my eyes out afterward. He had become like a second son to me. His last words to me were, "I will make sure to meet you again." The day I learned from his mother that he had passed away, I was devastated. Story 14. I had a patient who I was with when her doctor explained that she only had a few weeks to live. I knew her well and spent a lot of time talking with her about the news. In the days that followed, she seemed to have accepted that she was dying. She had lived a beautiful, independent, and fulfilling life, not necessarily financially successful, but genuinely happy. On day 10 after receiving the news, while I was helping her to the tub, she suddenly broke down and couldn't stop crying. She was overwhelmed with grief over having put her dog down, wishing they could have died together. It turned out her dog was on his deathbed as well. She had put him down a few days before going into the hospital, knowing her own life was nearing its end. She hated herself for it and for missing the chance to spend their final moments together. Watching and hearing her anguish was truly heartbreaking. She passed early in the morning 2 days later. I took a couple of mental health days after her passing and spent some time looking up dogs to adopt and searching for new jobs to apply for. Story 15. I used to work in the respiratory ward of a hospital almost a decade ago. I was young and occasionally took a puff of smoke from my friends when we went out drinking, only a few times, really. One day, one of my patients held my hand. She was dying and struggling to breathe, and I was there trying to calm her and offer some reassurance. She looked at me and said, "Never ever smoke." She deeply regretted smoking when she was young because now she was paying the price with her life. She hated smoking for all the damage it had done. She described it as drowning, saying that the sensation of being choked and losing your breath is absolutely terrifying, the worst feeling imaginable. Her words stuck with me. In her final days, we did everything we could to keep her comfortable as she struggled to breathe, with medications and support. She passed not long after, though I wasn't working that day. I never forgot her advice, and I never took another puff. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.